Вечер, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Слава нашему Господу. Я думаю, что у нас будет такой особый сегодня вечер. Такой урок будет, да? В принципе, наш спикер, он может говорить одинаково по-русски и по-английски, да? Но я думаю, что, учитывая, что наши многие студенты в школах все учатся по-английски термины, поэтому наша сессия будет на английском языке. Да? Не знаю, если по возможности что-то где-то попробуем перевести, но я думаю, что нам лучше делать или по-английски, или по-русски, но думаю, что для наших школьников лучше, чтобы это было по-английски. А для пожилого возраста, я думаю, что вы много что поймете, но я думаю, что программа направлена больше на колледж, на студентов, поэтому это очень важно, да. Хорошо, я думаю, что мы помолимся за эту session, да. Хочу напомнить о том, что с нами Илья Бундин, да, у него образование в сфере ядерной физики, да, и он также защитил, доктор по образованию также, да, и он будет служить проповедью в воскресенье, мы будем иметь утром и вечером, и будет проповедовать на тему о Духе Святом, о дарах, о крещении, да, поэтому мы молимся и верим, что Бог сделает очень много на выходных, в воскресенье. Нам это очень subject, который очень нужен, да. Итак, в общем, я хочу его предоставить, помолиться, да, и дать ему просто возможности, слово, да. Давайте мы просто помолимся. Вот он у нас был 2 года назад, поэтому давайте мы поприветствуем его, нашего спикера. Я помолюсь просто и дальше уже отдам микрофон молодому человеку. Зачем ему отдавать микрофон?
У меня уже он на ушах висит.
Окей, все нормально, да? Окей. И потом мы начнем варить суп. Отец, мы благодарим Тебя за эту привилегию и возможность, которую мы имеем, Господь Божий. Господи, мы знаем, что Ты Творец, Господь Божий. Этот мир, в этом мире очень много информации, которая пытаются, они просто, Господь Божий, унизить или уничтожить, Господь, Твое Слово, Твою истину, Господь. Мы здесь, Господь Божий, чтобы не только посмотреть со стороны Библии, Господь, признать это, но посмотреть также немножко другую сторону и понять, что Ты есть Творец, Ты есть Господь. И реально все, что окружает нас, Ты так мудро устроил. И из ничего, никогда бы ничего не произошло. Все имеет своего Творца. Мы благодарим за это. Поэтому благослови эту аудиторию, нашего спикера. Господь, мы сейчас благодарим Тебя за все во имя Иисуса Христа. Аминь. Вам, пожалуйста, слово.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say that the pastor has awarded me with some things that I've never earned. First of all, I did study nuclear power engineering back at my first university. Then at my second university, I got a degree in practical theology. When it comes to my doctorate, it's not an earned doctorate, and it's not in the area of education or science. It's in divinity. This is an honorary degree in divinity. But I have an earned Master of Science in nuclear power engineering and earned Master of Arts in practical theology. So let's talk about the idea that life arose by itself. Is it possible at all? And this presentation, I called it, in the beginning was the soup. Probably you remember the beginning, the very beginning of the Gospel of John, which says that in the beginning was the Word, right? So the Word being Jesus Christ himself, the Savior, the Creator of the world. But those people who deny the Bible, who deny the supernatural origin for life and for humankind on our planet, they believe that life arose on this planet spontaneously, that is, by itself. And supposedly we all came from the primordial soup, as they call it. And as you can see in the right side of the slide, from the right-hand side of the slide, this message comes as a part of a whole series of presentations on the origins, purpose, and victory. Actually, this is part 10 of the whole series, and you can find our ministry online at creationworldview.org. creationworldview.org. The ministry is called Creation Worldview Ministries. We are available on YouTube. We posted over 300 short videos recorded by our ministry leader, mostly. And you can also visit our website, creationworldview.org. So let's talk about the idea that life supposedly have arisen by itself through natural chemistry and some natural means. You know, back when we lived in the Soviet Union, and I'm sure a lot of you will remember the boldness of the Soviet communists and Soviet atheists. They would very boldly claim that there is no God, right? So there is no God, you can be sure of it, they would say. But modern atheists, like Ariane Shireen, the girl on the right, and Richard Dawkins, the guy on the left, they are not as bold as our communists were. And they, for example, ran a campaign, a propaganda campaign in Great Britain, trying to convince people in Britain, in London, and in other large cities that there is no God. And look at the slogan that they had painted on their buses. There is probably no God. And from that follows, they say, now stop worrying and enjoy your life. My question is, how can you stop worrying if you are not sure about God's existence? If there is probably no God, there is a probability, even according to them, that there is a God. So how can you stop worrying? If I saw that, that would freak me out personally. You guys do not know yourself, so you're trying to convince me of something. However, this idea of life coming from the primordial soup scientifically is called abiogenesis. Abio means not from life. Genesis from non-life. So if a biogenesis never happened, if that idea is impossible, then atheism as a worldview, as a faith, is absolutely unsatisfactory. You see, you cannot hold on to that if that never happened. Let me share something about some of the most notable, some of the most prominent scientists and scientific writers. For example, Paul C.W. Davies. He's a PhD in physics. He's a professor. He's a prolific author. He wrote 3 technical and 29 popular science books. And he's not a believer in God. He's not a believer in Jesus Christ. He's a secular author, scientist, and writer. This is what he wrote about this idea. Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. So this guy is familiar with the state of the art in life sciences, physical sciences. He writes about those things for the popular audiences. And he says nobody knows how that happens. How that happened. Spontaneously means by natural processes, by the processes which operate in nature without any supernatural involvement from some internal force that exists supposedly in the matter, or put simply by themselves. Nobody knows how lifeless chemicals organize themselves into the first living cell. However, if nobody knows how it happened, how can he claim that it happened spontaneously? That's a paradox, isn't it? So they believe it happened by itself, but they cannot prove it. Many non-Christian scientists, they know that abiogenesis, natural origin of life, is impossible. But the alternative, creation of life, for them is unacceptable completely. Yes, Pastor?
Maybe we should switch to microphone.
As you say, Pastor,
Let's keep getting
this is your house. You tell me what I do and I do that.
Put it on this. This is a back.
Yeah, I can hear
It constantly backfeed. And I asked Venya to change, and he said I struggle.
I thought they would work it out, but okay. Can you untangle me from this? Okay. Thank you, Pastor. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. If you could lower the sensitivity just a little bit, because I tend to become louder and louder over time as I get more and more excited. So, they do realize, those scientists and popularizer of science, that abiogenesis is impossible, but they cannot accept that God created us. Therefore, they willfully reject the idea of God's creation. But we know from the Bible that God created the whole world about 6,000 years ago in just 6 literal days. We know that God created the first human pair, Adam and Eve. We know that Satan used the snake to seduce them, to induce them to disobey God, and they did disobey God's command. They broke God's command, they transgressed, they fell away from God, they became sinners, and their children started being born with a sinful nature. That's why we need Jesus. That's why we need a Savior. This is what He came to undo. He came to undo the fall of Adam and Eve. And God created the first living cells. We read in Genesis 1:11 about the creation of the first plant cells, because plant cells are different from the animal cells. So the first plant cells were created on day 3 of the week of creation. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed. And Pastor, if I could get some water, because I get parched when I preached too long. Sorry. Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. So the first cells came into being as parts of living organisms. Diverse, complex living organisms. God created all of them on day 3. Grasses and trees. There was no, according to the Bible, slow and gradual evolution of plants, from single-celled plants to grasses to trees and so forth and so on. So this is how the plant cells came to be. And then on day 5, we read in Genesis 1:20, God created the first animal cells. God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So this is how, and this is when God created the first animal cells. And in virtually every slide in this presentation, you will see in the bottom left-hand corner a depiction of a model of the animal cell. Just keep reminding yourselves how complex that thing is. I will not allow you to forget how impossible it is for something like this to come to life by itself. And I'll show you a short portion of a science video, science animation that shows the inner processes in the cells, and you will be stunned, I promise you that, and you will see that it takes much more faith to believe that cells
originated by themselves than to believe in God even. Okay, there is a shelf down there. Now, let me introduce you to this gentleman who was my physics professor at the university. He was a very smart person. He became a full doctor of science in the area of theoretical physics, nuclear physics, quantum mechanics, etc., when he was just 37 years old. So he taught us, he started teaching us when we were just 17-year-old boys. There were no girls in our group. No girl can stand that boring stuff that we were studying. But he was teaching us physics, quantum mechanics, and this is what he admitted to me privately in a conversation after I became a Christian during my third year at the university. He told me privately that he didn't think that life originated on this planet. Probably he knew, he was aware of the writings of Sir Fred Hoyle or Sir Francis Crick. Sir Fred Hoyle was one of the most prominent astronomers of the 20th century. And this is what Sir Fred Hoyle wrote about the idea of abiogenesis in his book called The Intelligent Universe, A New View of Creation and Evolution. I can assure you, Sir Fred Hoyle never became a Christian. He never believed in the Lord Jesus Christ. But he rejected the theory of abiogenesis, spontaneous generation of life, simply from his scientific training, from his philosophy, from his intelligent, rational thinking. This is what he wrote. In short, there is not a shred of objective evidence to support the hypothesis that life began in an organic soup here on Earth. Yeah, he was not a biologist. He was not a life scientist, but he was a scientist with a deep interest, lifelong interest in all sciences. And he knew how to evaluate different ideas in the light of science. Sir Francis Crick, this is another top-notch, world-class scientist. He was a microbiologist, and actually he was one of the two men who discovered the structure of the DNA molecule. This is the molecule of life. This is the molecule that describes you. This is the molecule that contains the complete set of information that defines you. And he got a Nobel Prize for that. And this is what he wrote. I do not believe that life originated on this planet. I believe that life came from somewhere else in the universe. And he said, the microorganisms that first arrived to this planet from somewhere in space, they traveled in the head of an unmanned spaceship sent to Earth by a higher civilization. Well, this is the man who discovered the DNA molecule. Now tell me something. Will you ever hear about this from your science teacher in school? I doubt it seriously. Will you ever read about Sir Francis Crick's hypothesis, Sir Fred Hoyle's hypothesis, the doubts that other prominent scientists have? Will you ever read about those things in your textbooks? I doubt it seriously. This is the lesson number one for you to learn. They teach you something a lot of scientists do not believe, even from the secular world, okay? Now, the most popular theory of abiogenesis was developed simultaneously, pretty much at the same time, by two people. One of them, unfortunately, was our compatriot. He was named Alexander Oparin, and the second one came from Britain, and his name is very interesting to me personally. He's called John B.S. Haldane, or Haldane, and I think that he just BS'd everyone, but doesn't matter. Oparin-Haldane primordial soup hypothesis They are both credited with this theory, and they said that abiogenesis, life from non-life, supposedly occurred by itself in warm water on primordial, that's the earliest, the most ancient Earth, giving rise to simple and crude life forms. So according to them, man came from apes. They firmly believe that. But where did the ape come from? The apes came from fish. And where did the fish come from? The fish, according to Oparin and Haldane, came from soup. Yeah, that's exactly what they teach us. Have you ever seen fish soup? I did. I ate it. But I never saw a fish coming alive out of a pot. Now, this theory is still the most prominent. This is not a backward, ancient theory or hypothesis. This is a random site. I just went online to see how many people still believe it. And this is just a random website, biology-wise. And there's a screenshot over there from that website, and it says, several theories attempting to explain how life began on primordial Earth there are, of which the primordial soup, Oparin Haldane theory, is one of the most prominent theories. This is another website, and I highly recommend this website to anyone who learns or studies or teaches mathematics. This is Han Academy. Did you ever use the Han Academy website? This is an excellent website. Sal Han is, Sal Han. He's a marvelous teacher. He explains things, makes them so easy to understand. However, there is a lot of gender confusion in his head, I think. And their course on biology is also, I do not recommend it. So when they discuss the origins of life hypothesis on his website in the course on biology, they also discuss the Oparin-Haldane hypothesis, and they also claim that something called Miller-Urey experiment gave evidence to the truthfulness, to the truth of that theory. But I'll tell you something, this is not education. This is brainwashing, because a lot of scientists know it's not true, but they still keep teaching it. Now, we as Christians, we have nothing against good education. We are for education. Учиться и еще раз учиться, как завещал великий Иисус Христос. So we have nothing against good education. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, right? Okay? So this is what Jesus said. Therefore, teachers should be very careful how they teach their students. Because Jesus said, if anybody causes one of these little ones who believe in me to offend or to stumble or to lose faith or to start having doubts about God and Christianity, it were better for him or for her that a millstone were hanged about his or her neck, and that he or she were drowned in the depth of the sea. So if you teach science, please be very careful. Do not be dogmatic. Try to be moderate. Now, this is a serious issue. Right now, evolutionists, those who propagandize the theory of evolution, are not so bold when it comes to their claims. Their strategy remained the same, but they do not speak up anymore as boldly as they did before. For example, John Dunphy said that a classroom must and will become an arena of conflict. So you see, the people who push evolution and the ideas of spontaneous generation of life in schools, they do realize that there is a conflict between Christianity and everything else. And he says that we are going to fight Christianity where? In the classroom. And how? Through the curriculum, through the biology courses, through the textbooks. Classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, гниющий труп христианства. This is what it talks about. So they are fighting the rotting corpse of Christianity, as they understand it. Они борются против гниющего трупа христианства. Как в школе, как через учебники. And Christianity comes together with all its adjacent evils and misery. And what do they propose instead of Christianity? The new faith of humanism, resplendent in its promise of a world in which never realized Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will finally be achieved. Они говорят, they say that we will achieve what Christianity promised but never was able to deliver. They said, we will destroy the old world, до основания, and then we will build our own new world. Кто был не всем, тот станет чем. Do you remember the song? And I have a message for anyone in America who wants to try and do it. We tried hard for 70 years. We failed. It didn't work with us. And the people in the Soviet Union were not more stupid than the people in America. So if it didn't work for us, it will never work for you. If you try to do that now, to build that new world, well, we'll talk about that in about 80 years, 100 years. But you've been warned. Richard Bozarth. This is not Richard Bozarth on the cover. That's just a girl. That's just a lady. But the article I'm quoting was taken from that issue of the American Atheist magazine. The battle is on. The battle is on. They do not admit it any longer. They conceal the facts. But in the 80s, in the 70s, they were very bold to speak up. They said, we are in a battle against the Church of Jesus Christ. We are engaged in a battle against Christianity. And how are we fighting that battle? The battlefield seems to be the textbooks that are to be read by students in our primary and secondary schools. And now they explain why evolution is so important to them. Why it's so important to have the children believe in evolution. Evolution destroys utterly and finally the very reason Jesus' earthly life was supposedly made necessary. Эволюция уничтожает совершенно и окончательно ту самую причину, по которой якобы была необходима земная жизнь Христа. If Jesus was not the Redeemer who died for our sins, and this is what evolution means, then Christianity is nothing. Если Иисус не был искупителем, умершим за наши грехи, и именно это и означает эволюция, то христианство – это ничто. If you think that you can believe in God and evolution at the same time, this is a grave mistake. Because you will be playing into the hands of the enemy. Because they do realize that if there was evolution, there was no Adam. If there was no Adam, there was no serpent. There was no deception. There was no transgression. There was no fall. If there was no fall, then nobody needs Jesus. It's as simple as that. So there can be no middle ground between Christianity and evolution, unfortunately. Please understand that. If you do not, they will use evolution, and if you concede to evolution, your children will be more open to accept the idea of evolution, and then those guys and girls, they will help them to take that conclusion to its logical end. If there was evolution, Jesus is not necessary. Now, primordial soup, let's discuss it from the scientific standpoint. They say that life came, the first organic molecules, first molecules of life came from non-living molecules. Therefore, we have to modify our presentation. So apes evolved into people, fish evolved into apes. Where did the fish come from? The fish come from soup. And where did the soup come from? They say inorganic molecules, but where did the inorganic molecules come from? Rocks became alive by random chance. That's their idea of where we come from. So they say life could have arisen step by step, from simple to complex in a series of steps. Non-living matter became a living matter through a process of gradual chemical evolution. Please tell me something. Can you take something disorganized, something damaged, something broken down, and just through a step-by-step gradual development process obtain something more organized, more repaired, more painted? Can that happen? No, not in my backyard. I never saw anything like that happen. However, in nature, you can get a good, nicely painted new car, and about 20, 30 years from then, you will have a damaged, rusted over, broken down, possibly burned, wrecked car. Because in nature, everything goes downhill. Some processes can increase the complexity of things, increase the structural nature, improve the structural nature of things. For example, water can temporarily between water ice. And water ice is a more structured thing than a blob of water. But over time, the ice will melt, the car will rust over, the house will crumble. Given enough time, all processes in nature take us downhill. So this is a natural tendency, and the theory of evolution contradicts this natural tendency. So according to this idea of Aparin and Haldane, the early atmosphere back then, 3.5 and 4 billion years ago, there was no oxygen, or virtually no oxygen in the atmosphere. Simple inorganic molecules combined together. They took some energy from the sun, probably from the lightning strikes, and they formed the simplest building blocks of life, like amino acids. And please remember this word, this scientific term, amino acid, because we will be using it a lot from now on. So amino acids, those building blocks, the basic building blocks, they somehow by themselves combined to form larger and more complex molecules like proteins. That's the second key term here. So amino acids and proteins. Amino acids are the basic building blocks, like very small molecules. And when those molecules get linked to each other, when they form chains of amino acids, those chains later become proteins. So proteins are made of amino acids. And you can see here a very famous example of the protein hemoglobin. So the final result in the bottom right hand corner is a molecule of protein called hemoglobin. That's one of the most important proteins in your body. If you don't have hemoglobin, you die, because hemoglobin takes oxygen from your lungs and carries the oxygen to the cells throughout your body. And then it picks up carbon dioxide, CO2, from the cells and carries the carbon dioxide back to your lungs. So you breathe that way. Proteins are the most important components of our bodies and our cells. So hemoglobin is made from a certain sequence of amino acids. And these guys said that amino acids appeared by themselves, and then they somehow learned to get linked together to produce hemoglobin and tens of thousands of other proteins. Now, cell hand, or whoever wrote that course on his website, writes the following: the details of the model are probably not correct. So, okay, we understand that, but the basic idea, a stepwise, step-by-step, spontaneous, that's by itself, formation of a simple, then more complex, than self-sustaining biological molecules or assemblies is still at the core of most origins of life hypotheses today. So the idea, they say, is flawed in its details. However, the big picture is correct. This is what happened. Slowly, gradually, step by step. It's the same as to say that all construction materials, all building materials may spontaneously, by themselves, arise one day on a building ground. But that's not all. That's not all. That's not the end of it. Then those materials by themselves knew or learned how to assemble themselves to make the wonderful house you live in. That's the essence of the idea. However, let's go back to the quotation by Paul C.W. Davis. Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves. They say, yeah, that's a problem. We don't know how the building materials assemble themselves into a house. But this must have happened. How? It's unclear to us. Now, and he explains the problem. Just as bricks alone, or the building materials alone, don't make a house, so it takes more than a random collection of amino acids to make life. Like house bricks, the building blocks of life have to be assembled in a very specific and exceedingly elaborate way before they have the desired function. So he says everything has to be assembled in a very specific way and then folded and shaped in a very specific and a very complex way before it starts working as proteins do. And he draws this parallel between amino acids and the proteins and building materials and the house on the other hand. He says, we have no clue how that happened. But let's think about how those processes occur in the cells. In the cells, these chains of amino acids never assemble themselves. In organisms, they are being assembled. To have proteins produced in our cells, we need something, and we need a lot of things. First of all, we need about 20 different amino acids. We need a supply of the building materials, of the building blocks. Next, we need something called a ribosome. You see the ribosome in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. The ribosome is a machine in your cell that makes proteins. And in order to make those proteins, it should receive a program from the nucleus of the cell describing that protein. The ribosome does not know how to make that protein. It just makes them. An interesting thing is that the ribosomes are themselves made in large part of proteins. So, you need to have proteins to make a ribosome. And you need to have a ribosome to make a protein. Рибосомы делают белки. Но белки – строительный материал для рибосом. Нельзя получить белки, you cannot have proteins, если у тебя нет рибосом, if you don't have ribosomes. Но ты не можешь получить рибосомы, but you cannot have ribosomes, если у тебя нет белков, if you don't have proteins. This is chicken and egg problem. So it tells us that both ribosomes and the initial assemblage of proteins had to occur, had to come into being at the same time. Somebody had to make both the ribosomes and the proteins, otherwise it would have never worked. Now, As I said, the ribosome has no idea what kind of protein it needs to make next, because it makes all the proteins. All the proteins. So the information about a specific protein that needs to be produced comes from the nucleus, and another molecule called the mRNA molecule, mRNK, mRNA molecule. That molecule is a copy of the genetic information from your DNA. The information is copied from the DNA onto mRNA. mRNA takes it to the ribosome, and the ribosome makes the protein. And then another molecule, another variant of the RNA molecule is needed, called the tRNA, or transport RNA, is needed to grab individual amino acids and take them to the ribosome to be assembled into the amino acid chain. So, you see, this is the conclusion that we draw from this. In organisms, chains of amino acids, they do not assemble themselves. They are assembled using very sophisticated, very complex hardware, machinery, software, and encoded information. Hardware, software, hard, soft и кодированная информация. These things never occur by themselves. These things scream intelligent design. This is a proof positive that somebody had to create it. This is why Sir Francis Crick, this is why my physics professor, this is why Sir Fred Hoyle wrote what they did. It couldn't have happened here on this planet. Somebody had to bring it to this planet. There is something else. We need the information that describes the proteins, and that information is contained in the DNA molecule. But that information is useless until we have the machinery, unless we have the machinery to make proteins. And that machinery is called the ribosome. And at the same time, neither the information storage and processing facility, that's the nucleus and DNA, nor the ribosome can function without energy. So the cell must produce its own energy, and there are power plants in the cells that produce energy. They're called mitochondria. And in mitochondria, there are smaller machines that are called ATP synthase. Those machines produce energy. You see, they are completely interdependent. If you don't have the information, you cannot build the energy-producing engine. You cannot build the ribosome, protein-producing machine. If you don't have the ribosome, the information in the nucleus is useless. If you don't have the ribosome, you cannot build the energy plant, because it's made of proteins itself. If you don't have, so you cannot have one without having the two remaining things at the same time. These things had to be created simultaneously. This couldn't have occurred through a random step-by-step process. That's why those unbelieving, non-Christian scientists reject the primordial soup as a totally unsatisfactory theory. This is a creationist PhD, a scientist and educator. He says that the popularity of the Aparin-Haldane theory is not due to its truthfulness or that it's supported by evidence. Actually, it's popular only because people are not willing to receive the biblical God, the God of the Bible. So this happened supposedly about 4 billion years ago. You see there, in the beginning, about 4 billion years ago, there were simple molecules, then they became simple cells, and they evolved into fish, which evolved into apes, supposedly, and that evolved into us today. Some sources say that it happened not 4 billion years ago, but 3.5 billion years ago, but that doesn't matter. In any way, this comes from the book Biology, the Unity and Diversity. The first living cells emerged between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago, and there is an interesting comment. There is no record of the event. Первые живые клетки возникли 4 миллиона 3,8 миллиарда лет назад. Сведений об этом событии не существует. А как мы тогда знаем, что это произошло? How do we know it happened? So yeah, the history of life on Earth began approximately 3.5 billion years ago. How this occurred has been and will continue to be a topic for inquiry. Yeah. In plain English, we have no clue. And this comes from a whole biology textbook for children. We know it happened, but we do not know how. Now, when it comes to the Miller-Urey experiment, Urey was the leading scientist, and Dr. Miller worked with him. They both were outstanding scientists, and they developed a system trying to reproduce the process of a biogenesis as envisaged by Buldin and Buldin. They created this apparatus, and they conducted a series of experiments, and a lot of people today believe that those experiments proved that life could have formed on Earth by random chance. So they reproduced the primordial atmosphere, the early atmosphere of the Earth as they think. They provided the energy through electrical sparks, through electrical discharges. They circulated the gases. They trapped the products. Thank you. And they say, oh, we got several amino acids. So it means the idea must be correct. If we have the right atmosphere, if we have the energy source, we can form amino acids spontaneously. And according to Carl Sagan, a very famous person and propagandizer of evolution and deep time, the Miller-Urey experiment is now recognized as the single most significant step in convincing many scientists that life is likely to be abundant in the cosmos. Okay. It means that if it could have happened on the Earth, it could have happened somewhere else. It means that we're not alone in space. There are our brothers there. So, have scientists really produced life in this experiment? Let's talk about the problems with it. And this might come useful to anybody who studies life sciences in school, in high school especially. First of all, how did they know that the Earth's early atmosphere contained those gases? They didn't. Secondly, they excluded oxygen. Why? Because oxygen breaks life down. Oxygen oxidizes living things. Oxygen kills. That's why they said, oh, there could have been no oxygen there. However, now we know that oxygen always existed on the Earth. The deeper we dig, the greater is the depth of the Earth from which we extract rocks. We see oxygen present. So the idea of there being no oxygen in the early atmosphere is completely wrong. Now, the products that were trapped in the bottom section of the apparatus, they contained not only the useful amino acids, but also they included tar, cyanides, that's a killing compound, cyanides and carbon monoxide, and these compounds would disable amino acids. They are toxic to life. And they were produced at the same time. The amino acids formed came in the two existing variants. We will talk about these two existing variants of amino acids a little bit later, but they are called, like our hands, left hand and right hand. Those variants are called left-handed and right-handed molecules. So they were produced in equal amounts. The problem is that most living things, we ourselves, we use only left-handed amino acids. So if both left-handed and right-handed were produced, where is the filter that removed the right-handed amino acids that would be toxic to our final destination, to our goal we were trying to achieve. So there is no filter in nature, and natural processes always produce this mixture of useful and useless amino acids. Then, if they would keep recycling the products that were forming in the apparatus, if they returned the products to water, water would have destroyed them. And this is not all. If they kept recycling those products through the apparatus, if the products returned to the spark would break them down. So the spark gives them life, the spark kills them. Therefore, they had to remove the amino acids early enough, not allowing them to circulate through the apparatus. So they had to interfere all the time with the experiment, and certainly that did not reproduce what was happening supposedly in nature 4 billion years ago. Yeah, they played with the hydrogen gas, sugars, UV light. We know that the UV light breaks life down, kills life. So they had to protect the apparatus from harmful UV radiation. So they selected certain wavelengths of UV that were necessary and screened out the remaining wavelengths not to harm the products forming in the experiment. So the experiment strategically trapped and removed the products produced to prevent them from being destroyed. This is in no way a realistic natural environment. This sort of interference with the experiment is not allowed. So this experiment does not prove that life can originate by itself in nature, because there was a great deal of researchers' involvement. And let's talk about a little more about this problem of right and left-handedness. You see, the molecules at the bottom, if you rotate them to move the red lollipop to the right side and the green lollipop to the left side, so you rotate them and they will be identical, you see? However, the top two molecules, please pay attention to that yellow lollipop. If you start turning that molecule, you will in no way be able to make it identical to the other one. So the yellow lollipop makes it unique and not like the other one. This is what's called right and left-handedness, like your hands. They're not like each other, however you rotate them. That's why this is called chirality. You're familiar with the word chiropractor. Chiropractor. In Russian, manuальный терапевт. In Russia, Ukraine, nobody calls them chiropractors. Chiropractic, that word doesn't exist in the Russian-speaking world or Ukrainian-speaking world. They're called manuальные терапевты. Mano. What is el mano? En español. Hand. El mano. So manual, meaning using hands. He does his therapeutics using hands. So these molecules are like two hands, the right hand and the left hand. That's why they're called right-handed and left-handed. So in the experiment of Miller-Urey, they produced 50-50 mixed of right-handed and left-handed amino acids. So when the chains of amino acids are made in the Miller-Urey experiment, supposedly made in nature, they will be a mixture of the right-handed and both-handed amino acids. However, in the living things, all the amino acids used are left-handed. So the Miller-Urey experiment did not produce a viable environment for creating chains of amino acids, that is, proteins. That's a useless mix of chemicals. Now, let me share something from Dr. Fred Hoyle. He wrote a book. He wrote several books from his secular standpoint, from his secular point of view, trying to prove that we come from the stars. He said, the humanity is being degraded by the theory of Darwinism. Our origin is from the stars. There is a great intellect somewhere out there in the universe. And that great intellect supposedly knows that the universe is constantly evolving. So that great intellect devises ways to preserve itself. So, and at that particular stage of the universal evolution, that intellect understood that it should take the shape and form of the biological life. So that intellect created the simplest life, and then he would send viruses to the planet so that the viruses would cause mutations, new genes delivered from cosmos. So that's a very complicated theory, but he wrote several books trying to prove that we came from the stars. And this is what he writes about the primordial soup theory. Despite this, the entire structure of orthodox biology, meaning the biology that believes in the biogenesis, still holds that life arose at random. Yet, as biochemists discover more and more about the awesome complexity of life, it is apparent that the chances of it originating by accident are so minute that they can be completely ruled out. Life cannot have arisen by chance. The probability is totally against it. And then he said that it all goes against science, and he calls this a junkyard mentality. So this is an illustration he's famous for, and this is the illustration that he offers for us to see that it's impossible scientifically. Just a junkyard contains all the bits and pieces of a Boeing 747 dismembered and in disarray. A whirlwind happens to blow through the yard. What is the chance that after its passage, a fully assembled 747 ready to fly will be found standing there? So small as to be negligible, even if a tornado were to blow through enough junkyards to fill the whole universe. So he used mathematics. And he came up with this analogy, and he said, this is junkyard mentality. This is not science. These things could not have possibly happened by chance. And now let me show you the stunning part of the presentation, the one I mentioned at the very beginning. I'll show you a very small part of the scientific animation presentation created by Harvard's BioVisions and somebody else. So BioVisions plus Harvard. They created this in 2006, and you can find the total animation, the full animation on the internet. I will show you only one small part of it. You will see an Amazon delivery boy, okay, in your cells. You will see how proteins are made and how they are transported from where they were made, some of the proteins, in a special container using a special road to other places, other locations in the cells where they are needed. And when you see that, tell me please, can you, if you're sane, can you believe that such things could have happened by themselves, by random chance? I'm so sorry. Can we have the sound, please? Is it possible? No? I completely forgot that this comes with a sound. Игорь, там звук можно будет включить? Я пока отключу, чтобы ты мог спокойно сосредоточиться, подумать. Okay, I'll explain. So this is the rail for that delivery boy to use, the road for delivery boy to use. And those rails, those roads are built on demand and disassembled on demand. Не получается со звуком, да? Что-то он замерз, он вообще завис, похоже. Он не реагирует. Ну ничего. We're patient people who will have grace with technology. Игорь, если что, убей просто эту презентацию, перезапусти ее заново. Прошу. Вопросы? We drill, first of all, and then we use earthquakes largely. And we study how the earthquake waves move inside the earth. And they came up with the idea of how the earth is structured on the inside. Yeah, about 12 kilometers. Кольская сверхглубокая. Yeah. Сколько? 11,5? Again, we do not know for sure. We do not know for sure, but we can conjecture, we can hypothesize, and we can study the waves that travel in the interior of the earth, because every earthquake produces waves in the earth. And we have enough seismic stations around the planet to track those waves, and by the time it takes for them to travel from the origin to a particular seismic station, we can figure out the speed it traveled, etc., and they figure out the internal structure of the earth, basically through that. But I can assure you the earth is not hollow, and it's not flat.
Why is the science 100% science that we know what's below 12 kilometers, like underneath? That we can trust, you say?
There are some doubts when it comes to the theory of plate tectonics, for example. They say that the continents are being constantly processed. Parts of the continents in the subduction zones go down and become the mantle material. Some creationists don't believe that theory, some of them do, but this theory about the layering of the inner structure of the earth, it's not disputed too much. So it's considered to be more or less settled. Yeah. Agreed upon. Ну что там с этим? Он вообще вот совсем отказывается сотрудничать. Сейчас, одну секундочку. Что? Звука не будет, а презентацию можно запустить? Или презентация сама... О, подождите вопросы. Сейчас вопрос успеем. Смотрите, вот это вот тот самый доставщик Амазона, это белок, protein. This is a protein that carries a container full of other proteins. And he, or it's not he, it's it, or they, this is the mitochondria, this is the energy plant of the cell. So it's also constrained by those rails, so they do not allow it to move about as it wishes. Now, this happens in each and every of your cells. Now look at that. From the pores, from the nucleus, come the mRNA molecule carrying the program for the ribosomes. Then that program is ready to be read, and the ribosome attaches itself to the mRNA molecule and reads the instructions, reads the program, and produces the protein from that program. Can you imagine this happening by chance? No, not me. It's much easier to believe in God who created that than to think that that made itself. Yeah, this is the ribosome which reads the program and produces the protein encoded by that mRNA and delivers that protein at the exact spot where it's needed. Yeah, that's the protein that carries the container with other proteins. And this is the delivery event. So the thing arrived to the spot, and the proteins from the container are being delivered. That's amazing. It takes more faith to believe that that came to life by chance than to believe in God, in my opinion. Okay, what's that? Oh, that's that thing. Now, I believe this is the last slide. Let's read this challenge. So there's a challenge out. Still now, you can find it on the internet. And that challenge is called, What's the Secret of Life? And this problem of a biogenesis, of life coming into existence from non-life, supposedly, is called the question number 1 in all of science. Origin of life is the hardest question in science. We have no clue. No one knows. Yeah, no one knows. No one knows how the first cell came about. That's the state-of-the-art situation. Это то, что ученые знают сегодня. They say, we have not the slightest idea. We do not know. There is a simpler, more fundamental question, and this question is really more fundamental. Where did the information come from? Because the ribosomes produce proteins from the information supplied by the DNA. Where did the information come from? Information always comes from an intelligent source. An answer will trigger a quantum leap in artificial intelligence, blah, blah, blah. New 10 million prize seeks a definitive answer. So they have no answer. They teach our children in school as if this really happened. But then they say, we actually do not know. So life could not have arisen by chance. If you do not know how life came to be, please be not sure that there is no God. That life is so complex, and that we have life, and we have conscious life, and we have even simple cells. That thing tells us that there is a God. If there is a God, there is a creator. If there is a creator God, he's got his own rules. He rules this universe, and one day you will answer to that God. One day you will stand before that God, and you will have to give an account for your life. So we pray tonight that your account will be good. Yes, I believed in Jesus, and his blood washed away my sins. Because Jesus is the only name given to people through whom they can become reconciled with God. So the whole point behind this is that you may believe that Jesus is the only way for you to have a good account before God, to come into eternal life. Okay. That's how it's important. It's also important to know these things, just to understand how intense the battle is for our children. Because if we lose our children, the church will lose its next generation. The church will die in the next generation. I mean, not the universal church, not the whole Christian church in the whole world, but the churches that lose their children, they die out. I heard a lot of stories, even from Pastor Yaroslav, I think. Did you tell me the story about, no, it was not you. I heard that story in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, where there were a lot of Christians, originally Christian people, that came from the Scandinavian countries, and they said 50 years ago, 60 years ago, we had many Scandinavian churches in America, in that area, in the state of Minnesota. Now we don't have that many. We have none, basically. Because the children either became English-speaking people and joined American churches, or they just left. So we are in a battle in every generation for the next generation. And you've got to understand the sort of battle your children have to face and the intensity of the indoctrination they're being subjected to in schools. You've got to understand that. You've got to pray for them, and you've got to educate them, because if you know the truth will set them free. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will gladly answer your questions. If I can. Thank you. Yes. Понимаете, это не снято под микроскопом. Это мультик, который ученые сняли, изучив клетку. Вообще, если вы возьмете книгу, возьмите Библию, возьмете точку в конце предложения, эту точку разрежете на 70 кусочков. В уме. Ваш ум... Нет, ну вы же до 70 умеете считать. Я думаю, если вы напряжетесь, у вас получится. Так вот, вот эта вот одна, эта частичка 70, это будет примерно размер клетки. Но это мультик, это не увеличенные съемки, конечно же, под микроскоп. Это очень интересная проблема, и я думаю, в конце концов ее сумеют решить. Потому что до Луны мы добрались, много аппаратов исследовательских мы запустили, в космос мы летали. Теперь надо преодолеть несколько технических проблем, связанных конкретно с перелетом от Земли до Марса. И самая главная проблема – это защита космонавта от радиации. Потому что космонавт в космосе подвергнется не только опасности столкновения с каким-то небесным телом и все это. Привет, ромашки. Но это, кстати, цитата из мультфильма про Незнайку. Как треснемся об нее, и привет, ромашки. Но защитить от радиации, потому что на Земле от радиации, от смертельных космических лучей нас защищает магнитное поле Земли, которое Бог нам дал для того, чтобы нас защитить. Там этой защиты не будет. На Марсе жизнь... Собираются. Но нет, пастор, вы не переживайте, у вас церковь из-за этого не уменьшится числом. Нас туда не возьмут. Это, конечно, очень интересная идея. Я вам советую прочитать «Марсианские хроники» Рэя Брэдбери, это, по-моему, 50-е годы. Вот там как раз интересные вопросы колонизации Марса обсуждались, да, как люди хотели туда попасть. Сейчас, Светлана, прошу прощения. Нас туда не возьмут, мы слишком старые, но я думаю, эту проблему, если, конечно, Земля не плоская, ее удастся решить. Но я думаю, что Земля не плоская. Да. I will tell you something. I'm not sure they cannot. I'm not sure they would not. The only thing I can be sure of is that they did not in the recent years. We do have the technology. We did it several times. By the way, our people were the first to get a man into the outer space, and we landed several unmanned robots, surveyors on the moon, and we studied the moon remotely. And the Soviet scientists and engineers followed closely the American flights to the moon. They had the data coming from the American telemetry, so the Russians never contested the fact that Americans made it to the moon. That's the biggest proof that Americans actually made it to the moon, because the Soviets watched them do it and never contested it. So the reason why they don't do it now, I think it's too expensive, and it's not a challenge anymore. It was a challenge. Who'll do it first? We put the first satellite into space. We put the first man. We put the first man into the outer space, outside the spaceship. Then the Americans made it to the moon. It's not a challenge anymore. There is not a significant financial profit to be gained by colonizing the moon. It's just too expensive, and we've got inflation right now. So it's, yeah, it's
Just one more question. So what do you think was the agenda behind sending the first astronaut to cosmos, Yuri Gagarin, to space? And he said there was no God in there. And I remember reading it in the first grade, second grade, third grade in school. Yuri Gagarin went to
Right,
space.
right.
And he didn't see God there, so there is no God.
Right.
I really believe there was agenda behind it.
I'll tell you something. Gagarin went to space and didn't see God. Then he crashed in a plane and saw God. So
Yeah, but they didn't teach us that.
Гагарин сказал, летал, Бога не видел, это факт. К сожалению, так работает пропагандистская машина. Любое открытие извратить в свою сторону. Поэтому Гагарин был детем своей эпохи. Он совершил великий поступок, реально. И полет первого человека в космос – это великое событие, которым можно гордиться. Я им горжусь, например. Я очень рад этому. Но, смотрите, идея была не в том, чтобы отправить человека в космос. Конечно же, это дало инструмент пропагандистский советским коммунистам, безусловно. Но основная идея, которая двигала разработчиками космической программы, была в том, чтобы разработать ракету-носитель и поставить ее в массовое производство для того, чтобы можно было запустить ядерные заряды по американским военным базам, городам и флоту из Советского Союза. Вот в этом была основная идея космической программы. Исследования мирные были побочным результатом. Это пропаганда, это победа нашего строя. Это так, к сожалению, это так. Это был мощнейший пропагандистский эффект, но главная мысль была в том, чтобы разработать средства доставки ядерных зарядов. Не оттуда, с Земли. Вылетает ракета, скажем, с Плесецка, с Байконура, с республики Мари-Эл, с подводной, да, Джим, я видел, с подводной лодки Северного флота, и они летят вверх, долетают до определенного места и потом падают в точно очерченный квадрат. Вот в этом была вся идея космической программы, да, Джимми? Yes.
Would you elaborate
with the Bible. That's the right answer. That's the right answer. They got smarter. Sure. No, no. Let me answer Jimmy's question first. Слава Богу. Слава Богу. First of all, evolution requires billions of years, according to their theory. The Bible is quite plain, quite straightforward in claiming that God created everything relatively recently, 6,000 years ago, possibly 7,500 years ago, 7,500 years ago. So you cannot have the both at the same time. Either the earth is very ancient and then evolution could have been possible, maybe. But if the earth is young, no evolutionary theory can stand. So if we try to believe in the billions of years, we run into all sorts of problems with how we interpret the biblical text. If we are willing to accept the billions of years, then we have to transform somehow our understanding of the book of Genesis, of the book of Exodus, because in Exodus, God said, I have created the earth in 6 days. Therefore, you will keep the seventh day, the day in which I rested. You will keep it holy. So God spoke about a specific day on which he stopped creating the world. So that's the problem number one. Belief in evolution forces our hand, so to speak, to reinterpret the Bible. That's thing number one. Secondly, if evolution took place and if the earth is ancient, what does it mean? It means that long before Adam and Eve came to be, let me put it this way, death was already present on the earth. Because evolution means death. Evolution means struggle for existence. Evolution means suffering. And the unfit die out. God becomes cruel. So if evolution really happened, it means that for hundreds of millions of years and for billions of years, creatures were dying, were suffering, were killing each other. And I cannot reconcile this with the biblical teaching about God, good God, gracious God. It means that death came to this planet long before Adam. But the Bible teaches us clearly that death, the death of people and the death of animals, higher animals, it is a result of the sin of Adam and Eve. It didn't come before sin. It's a consequence of sin. But the evolution reverses that if we are even willing to accept that Adam existed and so forth. Then, when we study the fossil layers, we see evidence of predation, animals hunting and killing each other. We see thorns in the fossil record before Adam. And we see cancer in animals before Adam. So if we say, okay, God created Adam and Eve through evolution by evolving animals to the level of the apes and then evolving an ape or a population of apes into a population of people, then we have to accept that cancer, that thorns, that predation, actually the curse, it's okay. It's the norm. It existed always. So these things are totally incompatible with the Bible in my understanding of it. And again, if Adam didn't fall, and the evolution says that there was no Adam, basically. There was no creation. This is all a figurative story. If Adam didn't fall, we don't need Jesus. Now, let me answer. I saw your hand, brother. Let me quickly answer the pastor's question. I mentioned that during the presentation, and I had mentioned that to the pastor when we had a private conversation earlier today. Evolutionists were very bold in claiming that they are in an all-out war against Christianity in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s. But now they stopped doing that because they realized something. And I can show you articles in teachers' magazines, in the magazines and publications that discuss how to teach evolution to Christian children especially. They realize that if they antagonize the Christian children to start with, the Christian children will clam up and they will not be susceptible to the teaching of evolution. If they say, we will destroy your faith here, this is what happened. Actually, you will have to believe that Christian children stop listening. They stop giving in to the instructor. They understand that they are in a fight for their faith, and they defend their faith. And evolutionists recognize that, and they say right now we have to use the soft force. We don't have to antagonize the children. We will tell them that, okay, if you believe in God, that's okay, but let's study evolution also. And that takes the Christian children unawares. And if they are predisposed to allow for some form of evolution because of the teaching that they heard at their church, from their parents, from their teachers and instructors, that they read in Christian books that evolution is supposedly compatible with the Bible, they are more open. They are more susceptible to the evolutionary propaganda. They realized that, and they started using deception versus brutal frontal attacks. Just a second. There was a hand over there. Yes. Да, пожалуйста. Please. Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I believe in that, but I heard that some Christians believe in evolution, but it's not in the way that we understand evolution.
Right.
They believe that 6 days could be a period of time.
Okay.
Each day. It's not literal one day, or second day, or third day, like in 24-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
But some people believe it's actually a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
It could be 1,000 years, because it says in the Bible, one day is like 1,000 years for God, right? So some Christians believe in the period
Mm-hmm.
of time.
Absolutely.
That's what they call evolution. Not necessarily like billions and billions of years ago, but some period of time.
Mm-hmm. And what's your second comment?
The second one, as you were sharing the presentation, it came to me that this atheists, they see all this evidence that you were showing to us,
Mm-hmm.
that the life is so complicated, it couldn't come from nowhere. It must be a creator. But what came to me as you were speaking, that they will brainwash people further, even though they know that there is God, but they will continue brainwashing people saying that this came from another planet, from aliens, from somewhere else.
Right.
They will never admit that there is God, the creator. They will brainwash them further down. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, both of your comments are very valid and very interesting. And I want to come back to your first comment very quickly. Christians differ on so many issues, and the issue of evolution and the age of the earth is just one of them. I think that our position, my position, that I try to explain to you on the 6 days of creation and on the incompatibility of evolution with the Bible, I believe it's correct. However, this is one of those issues where we are allowed to differ. So I'm not going and raise support and go in a crusade against those Christians. who believe in evolution. I will still accept them as my brothers and sisters because they will have to accept me with all my errors in some other areas. Well, I'm almost perfect, man. That's a joke. No. I've got many errors, and they will have to be patient with me and accept me. And this is what makes us Christians. We believe in the Lord Jesus. We are washed in His blood. We are we're all parts of the same family, and the law of the family is love. And I'm not saying all these things to you, explaining all these things to you, so that we would become arrogant and start believing that we are the most righteous denomination. We will start our own denomination and everybody else will go into hell. No. This is not the point. This is not the this is not the point. The point is to learn. And we learn when we share our understanding. And when we look at each other's evidences and arguments and logic in the light of the Bible. That's it. That's all we do. And I believe that this is the way that we will better educate our children. This is the way we will better propagate ourselves. And this is in no way to argue or castigate anyone or to call them heretics or anything. That's it. Love in the spirit of love. Only in the spirit of love. Yeah.
I wasn't saying it to say that I am against it. That
I understand.
believe in that. I just said some Christians I know.
Yeah. Some Christians baptize people in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. There is another church, and I ministered at a couple of churches that believe that if you were baptized using the Trinitarian formula, you've got to be rebaptized to be saved. Okay, only in the name of Jesus. And if you are not baptized in the name of Jesus, you still have. I'm not cross with them. They were cross with me. No. I always try to act in love. You know, when you act in love, you can overcome any theological differences. Only if you want to fight, if you want to prove your point at any cost, then you will, you can prove temporarily something to someone, but you will lose a brother, maybe, and you will do harm to the church. And I'm not here to cause any harm to the church. So I try to explain a better way as I understand it. Okay, as I understand it. I think I'm right. But still, if you don't agree with that, I'll accept you in the spirit of love. Just a second. Да, брат Роман, я видел, но, пожалуйста.
What do you think about global warming? Are we destroying the planet with our plastic straws?
Without what? Plastic?
Plastic straws, yeah, you know how they're
Well, first of all, I don't think that plastic straws have a lot to do with global warming. I think that global warming is explained mostly by the cows burping. Are we still on record? I want to use another word which starts with okay, from the opposite end. So the cows, they release a lot of methane. That's why we've got to eat crickets. That's why we have to. We shouldn't eat meat, and this is why we've got to get rid of diesel vehicles, gas vehicles, in order to enrich the people who support. We've got to enrich the people who are lobbying the electrical vehicles industry. So there's a powerful lobby there, and they just want to sell their electric vehicles. That's why, in my opinion, they are using that thing to brainwash people to become scared of the gas cars and that car. Huh?
I can use the straws. Plastic straws.
Well, do as your conscience tells you. Yes, bro. Gap theory. Okay. The same problem. First of all, the biggest problem with the gap theory, I don't see the gap. Okay, the gap theory is tells us that God created the first world. It was perfect. And then that world rebelled against God, and Lucifer was the ringleader of that rebellion. And probably there were some conscious beings, conscientious, intelligent beings on the earth with souls. Maybe there weren't, maybe there were just animals on the earth. But that world rebelled against God, Lucifer fell, and the creation got so much out of God's control that God had to completely destroy the first earth with a flood. And all that happened between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. That's the problem for me, because when I read the account of creation, I see no gaps there. God started creating. He created the space, matter, and time continuum. He started out with a blank earth. It was just a blob of mass covered with water. There was no evil there. There was no destruction there. It was just the primeval state, the initial state from which God started creating everything. And he took 6 days to shape the creation and fill the creation. So I don't see any gaps there. Then the problem also is that because of their particular understanding of the history of the earth, they have to twist the Bible. They say, for example, that the word was, relating to the earth, should read become. So the second verse says, and the earth was formless and void. They say, no. We understand that there was a fall, there was a flood, that Lucifer's flood, the earth was destroyed. Therefore, this word should be translated not as was, but actually became. And that's what I mentioned before. If we try to accommodate the theory of evolution into the Bible, then we will have to twist the Bible. We will have to rewrite the Bible. If somebody tells you that my theory is correct, but to prove it, I will have to change the Bible, the wording in the Bible, I reject such arguments right away, out of hand. So that's one of the false arguments, I think. Then they say, you see, in Jeremiah, when the Babylonians destroyed Israel, the same wording is used, the same language is used. The land became formless and void. And they make a back argument. They say, you see, if in Jeremiah it talks about formless and void being a result of destruction, it means that in Genesis 1:2 it also talks about destruction. But this is not the only possible interpretation of Jeremiah. In Jeremiah we see that the judgment of God reached its peak, and as a result of that judgment, God decreated, destroyed all his blessings given to his people. And the earth, the land of Israel, figuratively became devoid of any blessings. It became formless and void. See what your sins did to your beautiful land. That's the interpretation that I accept. And in Genesis 1:2, the earth was formless and void because it was not yet formed and not yet filled, not because it was destroyed. And then another problem, the gap theory requires Lucifer falling before the creation of Adam and Eve, before the creation of Adam and Eve. But we read in the book of Ezekiel, in Job, all the sons of God rejoice seeing God create that for one thing. So Lucifer is one of the sons of God, one of the angelic sons of God, and he was there. He was rejoicing with God. And then the book of Ezekiel, we read about Lucifer. It's about Lucifer. It's about the king of Tyre, but it's about Lucifer. You were perfect in all your ways since the days of your creation, and you were in Eden, in the garden of God. So Lucifer had an assignment in the garden of God. And he walked in the garden and he served God in the garden. He was an anointed cherub. And he had some dealings, obviously, with Adam and Eve in the garden, so that he couldn't have possibly fallen before the creation of the garden. So that theory, I'll tell you something. Maybe you heard about a textbook on systematic theology written by Wayne Grudem. That's one of the leading theologians today in the world. He's one of the masterminds behind the ESV Bible translation, like General Editor or something. And he authored that systematic theology textbook this thick. And typically it's used as a standard text in many theological seminaries right now. I use it too. And there he says plainly, this theory is not compatible with the Bible. It was popular because of the Schofield Bible commentary, Finis Dake's annotated Bible. Now it's been popularized by Jimmy Swaggart in his Bible. I heard Derek Prince mentioning that. He believed, obviously, that theory. I heard Kenneth Hagin mentioning something like that. But they said, we're not sure. We don't know. So for them, it was tentative. However, it became popular because of certain Bible commentaries among the people. But among theologians right now, there are very few theologians nowadays that believe it still holds water.
That's why I asked, what do you think? Because we have, when I was in Bible college, we were studying.
Yeah.
We get theory,
Yeah.
this was on the test. And it's just verse 1 and 2. And that's the get theory. And it's like, it's not, they told us that this is not anti-salvation. It's not debatable. It's just, that's what it says. But
Yeah.
it's not true. So it's not, it's the, so I just, that's the opinion. What do you think? Because you study also on this. And it's fair to understand because it's all this what they this scientist explains and they talk about this, but they don't even know the differences who came the egg or the chicken first. That's how smart they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's funny because
Yeah.
they cannot explain away.
Да, конечно.
Никогда не слышала это get theory.
Слава Богу.
Когда я читала translation, it's tree of life. It says, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And then написано, что the earth was waste and chaos. I'm not sure if there is any other translation that uses those words. But to me, like, when I put things together, the devil was thrown down from heaven. So why was he in the garden if he was thrown down from heaven? Wasn't he in heaven
Do you
first?
believe
If he was
Ezekiel
thrown
is,
down,
yeah.
maybe he made this chaos.
I actually thought about when you mentioned, do you believe in Ezekiel that he was walking in the Garden of Eden? You actually think definitely it's an Eden or garden where the Adam and Eve?
Just does
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
That's
Makes
interesting.
me just
I
don't
never thought about it.
Well, no, there's no chaos. В английском нет хаоса. Это просто какой-то перевод сестра видела, один из переводов.
So basically when the devil then rebelled,
After
right? And
the
sixth day,
creation, no, it took time. It took time. He saw,
So you say the devil rebelled, that he was walking in Eden and the
at first he was walking in Eden.
humanity was
He-
living there?
Yes, Adam and Eve were there, and he had his role to play.
What is the proof of that?
There is no proof.
Ezekiel. Ezekiel, you were in Eden, in the garden of God. You walked in the midst of the fiery stones. Just a second. And then he rebelled, and then when, because of the, what's the word? Not the abundance, but because of the abundance of your trade or something, of dealings with, your heart became haughty. You started thinking about yourself, and then when you became sinful, I threw you out of there. That's what happened. So that happened after the creation of Adam and Eve.
You know how we read in the Bible and we know God told people everything to make like tabernacle, right? He gave them instruction to make on earth just like it is in heaven.
Right.
Could it be heavenly Eden?
The The Bible never talks about any heavenly Eden. It talks about Eden, and that's the only Eden that there is in the Bible.
It said he was created. He was, the cherubim who was kind of worshiping around God.
You see, angels,
This,
angels,
wherever you just throw the
all the
cherubim,
angels,
few things might contradict.
all the angels, they were created to serve God, to benefit people. So it's very much conceivable that Satan was ministering both to God and to people, or to God to benefit people.
I actually thought that we are created because Satan is supposed to be worship to God. And since he failed, God created us so he can worship.
Pastor, that's a good joke, but it never says about that. It never says that in the Bible. Yes, Jimmy.
The way I just want to add to that, the way I understand it is on the sixth day, God created everything and it was perfect. It was good.
Absolutely.
And I don't think having a chaos, destruction, Satan wreaking havoc, having demons, that would not be good. So I think simply everything is perfect.
Absolutely. That was a perfect creation. So there could be no devil on the loose on day 6. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
But all this chaos that they're talking about, how the light became, how the sun and the moon, how they can explain all this, what they are spitting.
No, they cannot. They say this. Fish came from soup came from rocks, and rocks came from a bang. That something banged, and it created itself. Yes.